Next up, we have someone I think you all know. He's been called by some the MLS Whisperer. I don't know if that adds some excitement. He's with a company called Remine, which is making some headlines with some of you recently. So let's just bring him up, Mr. Tim Dain.
I don't know about that. I'm too loud to whisper usually, so we'll see where it goes. So, good morning. It's good to see everybody in person. I know we kind of bumped into each other at CMLS, but this just feels a little more different, a little more normal, because I'm used to packing again now. So, hopefully we'll be able to continue this. Let me make sure. All right. So, Deconstructing the Monolith. Fancy title for just how to modularize the MLS, right? So let's dive in. I think the first thing we do is set sort of a standard. What is a monolith, right? If you think of monolithic structures, like I don't know why Stonehenge comes into my mind, but something really big and hard to move comes into mind, right? So in the MLS space, it's really just kind of broken down very generically into these 4 buckets, if you will. And anytime something breaks within a monolith, it sort of takes down the whole thing. There is no easy way to keep operating when you're on a monolith, right? So if you think of it, when your user interface goes out, you can't really just plug in another user interface in a monolithic structure. When something breaks, you can't take it out and plug something in. So if you start to break that down, I mean, that's really cool. Now we kind of know what a monolith is, but Tim, you suck at explaining things, so why don't you give us an example from pop science?
Are you ready?
Who are you?
I am the Borg.
That is a contradiction. The Borg have a collective consciousness. There are no individuals.
I am the beginning, the end, the one who is many. I am the Borg.
Greetings.
So there you go. Hopefully you guys understand a monolith a little better now. The monolithic purpose really is to service the collective, right? So it's a good parallel. How do they do that? They co-opt technology and knowledge through assimilation, right? You will be assimilated. And their goal is to achieve perfection through explicit command and control. So if you don't know the difference between, say, explicit command and control and implicit command and control, the first is, I'm your boss, do what I say. The second is, I'm your boss, I've given you a goal, now it's your job to go attain that goal in any means necessary, right? So a monolith is very much on the explicit side of command and control. And as you all know, resistance is futile. That said, I do think there's hope, right? So resistance is futile, but hope is eternal. Let's talk a little bit about modular architecture, or the tenets of modularity, right? And I think modularity is what's going to replace the monolithic structures within our marketplace. The first tenet there is strong encapsulation, right? We have to have a way, if vendors are going to start to play together in a modular ecosystem, they have to be able to do things like protecting their intellectual property, right? They have to ensure that there's a way that they can scale without giving away any of their corporate secrets. There has to be a very well-defined interface, right? So we need to have really well-structured APIs, contracts, service level agreements. You have to be able to guarantee uptimes to each other. You're going to be trading off of each other's products and services to build out the user experience. So for that user experience, we need some really explicit dependencies, right? We need a great roadmap on how we're all going to work together. So what are the guidelines for how one module talks to another modular when they're built by different vendors? So those are really the 3 tenets of modularity as we shift away from the monolithic structures within our industry. So this is a really rudimentary, I'm not a coder, I don't know really what I'm talking about up here, I just did a lot of research for this, so this is my way of showing a modular architecture within our space. Right, so you got listing input and maintenance, CMAs, reports, user interfaces, search and display, client management. That's sort of a MLS modular structure, if you will. But if we start to look at this, we start to ask ourselves, what's the goal? If we're going to do all this work, what do we expect as outcomes? Right, and I think one of the key outcomes is to increase functionality. Right, so if you look at something like just listing input and maintenance, you start to see things like multi-MLS submission coming to light, broker and vendor APIs so that anybody can do listing input and maintenance and build the UI off the top of it. Owner-enhanced additions, all right? What if all of a sudden an owner of a house can enhance the listing that a real estate agent has put into your MLS? I realize that's kind of out there, but I think with modularity, you can start to experiment with stuff like that. AI-powered micro price adjustments, right? I'm sure Zillow's somewhere in this room, you know, as they get 1 million listings across the United States, what if they started to think about how often people search those listings, the search times, when they're willing to pay more or less by just a few $100s, and all of a sudden they start introducing micro price adjustments onto the website. So Thursday at 6 p.m., if they know people typically spend $1,000 more per home, they just do a price adjustment and raise all the homes $1,000. Little out there again, but I think with modularity, you can start to build in functionality like that. Accommodate the pace of change, right? We all get a little tired of saying the pace of change is really fast. I think we need to shift into accommodating that pace instead of trying to speed it up. You do that through dedicated developers. So each module has its own dedicated development team, right? There's not a group of developers working on a monolith anymore. There's smaller groups and teams of developers that are working on each module. And then ending full system conversions, right? When you want to switch something out, you just highlight the module you want to switch out and you change it out. You don't have to do a full system conversion. And then the last is to enhance optionality, right? So what we might call front end of choice, just plug in another search and display, right? We do it all across the nation right now. We have multiple markets that run many different front ends, and in a modular world, that becomes a more attainable solution. So the modular ecosystem, let's chat just briefly about that. First, modules have independent life cycles, right? So if each module has its own life cycle, you can start to sunset and sunrise products or modules of the MLS system much faster than if you're in a monolithic structure. You can enable innovations that elevate cross-functionality. So once we're able to communicate with each other around this really well-defined set of standards, if you will, you can start to elevate the ability to do things across modules and across vendors. You can start to leverage what Group A did to improve what Group B is doing. Independent modules increase the speed of experimentation, and this, I think, is really important, right? Once you have independent modules with API structures and you allow brokers, agents, technologists, other vendors to start developing off of those, you really increase the ability to let them experiment within that environment. Last one is, our second to last one, long-standing autonomous teams responsible for each module. So I should have mentioned this in the previous slide, but I think this is an important function too, right? When you have a team that's dedicated to just a specific area of improving the MLS system, I think you start to see that area like listing input and maintenance start to elevate away from the monolithic structure. And then modules can be built with a diverse set of technologies, so we're not stuck in one single tech stack, right? Each module could have a different tech stack entirely, which I think is important, especially with the lack of ability to hire developers for almost every technology company in the United States today. Being able to do that spreads your risk out. So let's take a quick look at what this might mean in the traditional MLS monolith, right? And I really made this a simple structure, data in, data storage, data out. I think it'd be hard to argue that the MLS is dramatically more than that. I realize there's a lot that goes into those three things, but if we focus on just one thing, data in, right? Listing input and maintenance. What are some of the possibilities when you shift over to a modular structure around listing input and maintenance? So we all know these basic things, right? Auto-population from multiple data sources. We already do things like public records. We're starting to do things like floor plans, thanks to Mike Werzer and his group at FBS. It's gonna be interesting to see how floor plan type modules start to increase the ability for listing input and maintenance to leverage some of the data they have there. Then you look at something like the Department of Natural Resources, right? In Minnesota, they build their own ad edit at North Star, and they auto-populate data around lake temperature, depth, fish population, those kind of things for lake properties. It gets really cool. So you can start to broaden your mind and think about all the different data sources out there that could elevate listing input and maintenance. If it's its own module, you could start to do things like work on a field change tool set for MLS administrators. What if you no longer had to pick up a phone and call your vendor to add a field to your MLS? What if it was just a what you see is what you get kind of WYSIWYG tool where the MLS admin could make their own field changes on the fly? Documented guidelines for marketing integrations within listing input, right? So what if all of a sudden you could do things like automated image enhancements? We have companies like Box Brownie out there that are working on great AI to enhance images on the fly. What if that were built right into your ad edit tool? What if some company like, say, Zillow or Realtor.com decided they wanted to leverage that API to build out a really cool preview tool set so that you could see how the listing's gonna look on their website before you ever hit publish? Right? These are the things that are possible when you start to look at modularity and you focus on improving the pieces and parts of an MLS system instead of the entire monolith.